Thank you, Justice Wiggins. Commissioners, welcome, good afternoon. First day of, 4 days, I think, so hopefully you're still awake, and I'm not going to be saying things you've heard 1,000 times before. First thing I'm going to say, I'm sure you've heard multiple times before, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say it, which is to thank all of you for your service. I'm sure you didn't expect the amount of work that has been laid in front of you, but I appreciate you all providing the service to this great state and for allowing me to come speak with you. There are many well-qualified persons who have applied, but the candidates before you are not solely defined by their professional qualifications, but also by their personal qualities, who they are as persons outside of their profession. So I will briefly dispense with my professional qualifications and then share with you who I really am. I'm in my 21st year of professional service to the people of Iowa as an attorney. In that time, I have had the honor to represent individuals and businesses in a wide range of matters, from contract disputes to real estate transactions, from drafting of wills to the probating of estates, from disagreements between companies to disagreements between neighbors. I've had the privilege to represent the disabled, unfairly denied an opportunity to earn a wage, and to represent the small business owner, unfairly accused of discrimination. I've helped the victim of sexual assault regain her dignity and given voice to an abused child too young to speak. I've helped commercial businesses on $1 million construction contract and a small business collect on an unpaid bill. I've helped grieving families who have lost a loved one hold those responsible for that loss accountable. I've tried cases to juries and to the bench in both state and federal court, and have tried administrative matters before both state and federal administrative agencies. I've presented multiple appeals to both state and federal courts of appeals. Where my clients have been unable to afford to pay me for my services, I have represented them for free at reduced cost. I've provided untold hours of legal advice to those in desperate need of legal guidance. I literally had a woman call on one occasion who was locked in the bathroom of her employer's business, and I could hear him in the background pounding on the door, and she needed desperately my advice at that moment, and I was honored for the opportunity to give it to her and to help her. I'm proud of my professional service to the people and businesses of Iowa. I'm also proud of my professional service to my peers and to this great state. I serve by appointment on 2 aviation advisory committees with the Department of Transportation. I was appointed by the Supreme Court to the Civil Justice Task Force, and I serve the 5th Judicial District on the Children's Justice Team. I'm regularly called upon to speak to attorneys across Iowa and across the country on complex legal issues. I've spoken to attorneys in other states and on a national level a dozen times, and to my colleagues here in Iowa, many dozen more. My writings are relied upon by lawyers, and I can proudly say at least one law professor. I am regularly asked to associate on cases with other lawyers, and regularly receive calls from lawyers within the state and outside of the state asking for my advice. What I've just told you is what I do. Now let me tell you a little bit about me, who I am. I live with my wife and our children on our family farm. It's been in our family for over 50 years, near New Virginia. We tend the farm and rely upon and are relied upon by our neighbors, as rural Iowans have always done. Living in the country, I've learned the importance of community, of pulling together. I have more than once walked miles of field or timber looking for a lost or injured animal. I've helped mend fence in the dead of winter, and have helped free a tractor buried to its belly in the mud. Somebody else has done that, I'm sure.
I assure you not. Joe's a clean hands guy.
A few years ago, as I was preparing to go into my office, I received a telephone call from Bill Willis, who's my neighbor to the north. And he was calling to tell me that our neighbor just to the east had just lost her horse of 25 years. And she was very distraught. And she couldn't tolerate the idea of having the animal carted off somewhere to who knows what destiny. So I spent that day not working as an attorney, but using my tractor along with Bill to dig a hole big enough that you could put a Volkswagen in it. Now, of course, we weren't burying a Volkswagen, and I would hazard to guess that I'm probably the only candidate before this commission that has actually buried a horse. When I received second-degree burns, because of my own folly, nobody for me to sue, on my left hand and my left arm, such that I couldn't finish a project on my farm, my neighbor, another neighbor, showed up unannounced and finished the work for me. That's the way it is where I live. We help each other out. And it's from acts of giving and receiving like this that I've learned the real value of service to community. To paraphrase Woodrow Wilson, there is no idea as uplifting as the idea of service. Let me tell you how I've applied my personal commitment to service in my life. I'm a skilled carpenter and handyman, and I use those skills whenever the opportunity permits to provide service in my community. For example, when my oldest son was in daycare, I volunteered on multiple occasions to go over and spend the day repairing fence or fixing playground equipment. More recently, I've had the opportunity to help work on homes with Habitat for Humanity and have been asked to come back and serve as a crew leader, which I will do this spring. And I'll have the opportunity to lead and work alongside volunteers in the construction and remodeling of homes for low-income families. I serve my rural community as a township trustee, overseeing the maintenance of our cemeteries, the provision of fire and emergency services, and the resolving of fence disputes between neighbors, which does involve putting on your muck boots and going out into the fields. I regularly volunteered at my son's school, coached his soccer team, and have been a Cub Scout den leader for many, many years. In connection with scouting, we hold an annual food drive in our hometown of New Virginia that collects much needed food for our community. I'm proud of my service to community as a neighbor, as a carpenter, as a school volunteer, as a coach, as a township trustee, and as a scout leader. But the most important service I perform doesn't involve my hands or my mind, it involves my heart. As foster parents, my wife and I take abused and neglected children into our home and love them as our own. I would be remiss if I didn't use this opportunity, commissioners, to speak to the great need in this state of the people, for people to give love and care to our most vulnerable children. There are too many children and too few loving homes. To quote another, the test of the morality of a society is what it does for its children. I ask any who have room in their home and in their heart to consider this service. Being a foster parent is not for the faint of heart or the ill-prepared. My wife and I were both of those things when our first placement came to us. We received 4 siblings, a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and twin 7-month-old babies. All of them in diapers. And I will say that, I can truthfully say that of all of the manual skills I have mastered, none have been as valuable as the rapid diaper change. We were blessed with the fabulous 4, as we call them, for nearly a year. And I'm proud to report that they were adopted by an amazing couple, and they're thriving. Since that time, we've had many other children in our care, each one as deserving as the next of our love. For me, being a foster parent is the most difficult and most rewarding service that I can imagine. If appointed to the Supreme Court, I will work as tirelessly in service of our state as I do for my community, my peers, and troubled children. I will perform the duties honestly and without personal bias or outside influence. I will honor our Constitution and apply my analytical ability to solving the complicated questions that face the court. Yeah, could I have some water? Thank you, Mr. Fitzgibbons. You guys can tell I meant to bring my bottled water with me.
This is actually his full-time job.
Yeah,
A
it's
compassionate soul, thank you. I should have known somebody from the great northern part of the state would be so kind. Oh, there you go. Well, now I can speak again. I believe my experience as a foster parent, as an active volunteer in community, and as a recognized legal writer and lecturer give me qualities that would serve the court well. I cannot think of a more honorable and rewarding way to be of service within my profession than as a justice on one of the finest Supreme Courts in the nation. I respectfully tender myself for your consideration, and I'll gladly, I think, answer your questions.
Do we have any questions from the right side of the table, to my right?
I do.
Go ahead, Ms. Deneen.
You're young in comparison to some of the people that we've seen here, and you would be, if retention carried on, so you wouldn't lose your job in 2 years, have this job for a long time. Would it be challenging, and would you be bored?
It's an interesting question. It would definitely be challenging. And I don't think I could ever bore of the type of work that would be involved on the Supreme Court. I love the law and the research of the law and writing. And in fact, that's largely demonstrated by how much I've enjoyed and continue to enjoy my opportunities to speak and lecture to other attorneys, not only here in Iowa, but around the country. So for me, if anything, one of the frustrations in the private practice is that there's not enough of that. And I think I would really serve the state well and enjoy and not ever become bored. Thank you for the question.
Any other questions from that side? Professor Cochran.
Good afternoon, Mr. Lawyer. I noticed from your materials that you've had some experience drafting legislation and helping to write it, develop it. I wonder what kind of insight that gives you, seeing that process from the inside, to how the difficulties of a judge trying to interpret legislation that's come from the judicial or the legislative branch. I should know the difference between those three.
Well, thank you, Commissioner, for the... Not everybody does know the difference. Thank you, Commissioner, for the question. That's true. I've had the honor of drafting at least 4 pieces of legislation that have largely ended up enacted into law, and it has been a very insightful opportunity and process. I've learned, I think an unfortunate reality of the legislative process is that the language that ends up as our laws starts out usually very concise and clear and well written, and by the time it's gotten through that process, it's much less clear. There's a give and take, necessarily a give and take in the development of legislation and compromise and negotiation that brings ambiguities into legislation, and in fact thereby creates work for the court. I've literally sat at a subcommittee hearing or meeting where legislation was being talked and pieces were being taken out, and then in the discussion afterwards, it was much less clear then at that point. In the discussion afterwards, you could tell that each side was expecting that the gray area they have created would be interpreted by the court in their favor, and it took that ambiguity in order to get enough votes to get it passed. I think the other thing that I gained from my exposure to the legislature is an understanding more generally of how things work there. I would hope that I would be able to take that experience and use it to try to develop some valuable relationships between the court and the legislature. I think the one perhaps drawback of the court having moved to this beautiful building is that our justices don't have as frequent of an opportunity to, if nothing else, bump into legislators in the hallway in the state capitol. And that we need to have continued contact between the judicial branch and the legislative branch.
Mr. Pace, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Justice Wiggins. Good afternoon, Mr. Lawyer.
Good afternoon.
One of the things we've been hearing a lot about from other folks and that have been sitting in the chair that you're in right now,
Hot seat?
so far, is something having to do with different names for it, isolation, a bit, or not as much interaction between the court and the public, or maybe some communication that could happen to perhaps open up the relationship better, or have the public understand what the court does in a better way. There's different ways to talk about it, but I was interested in the legislature. You kind of addressed that, but how about the public, and then also the district court bench, if you could address that for a minute? Whatever things could be done there to perhaps improve the situation.
I thank you for the question. I'd be glad to. I think that the public doesn't see our Supreme Court justices as ordinary people, as people that are in community, engaged in community. I know that they are, but I think that anything that we can do to make that more visible is helpful. I would intend to continue to serve as a foster parent, even as a Supreme Court justice, and time permitting, to still swing a hammer for organizations like Habitat for Humanity. And I think those kinds of things help the public to understand a little bit better that the justices are still Iowans. They're still people of community. As far as reaching out, I would like to see the court be a little more proactive as far as reaching out to the public still, and then I'd like to address with the judges and the bench and the bar. But I'd like to see the court be a little bit more proactive at making itself available for public education opportunities. Right now, if you go on the Supreme Court's website, there is a place where one can click and request a justice or a judge to come be a speaker at a school. But I don't see why the court can't make that directly known to the schools, to reach out to the schools and let them know that if they would like to have for a day, for a class, a justice or a judge come in and speak, that's available to them. And I think, again, that would help in the broader understanding of our students and of our citizens of the role of the judicial branch. That's a long-term project, obviously, but one that I think needs to be started soon. With regard to the bench and the bar, I'm sure the lawyer members of the committee have heard the sentiment that there is a feeling that the court has not always heeded or listened to the advice of the bench and the bar. That is certainly improving, but I think it needs to continue to improve. The court, obviously, in making decisions on a case, must decide that independent of any outside influence. But the court, I don't think, should ever make a rule of procedure or of evidence without a lot of outside input, a lot of discussion with the trial judges and with the attorneys. Now, that said, for example, most recently, the court has put together this task force on civil justice reform. And unlike past times where I think some have felt that the matter being discussed or for which public input was being sought was somewhat of a foregone conclusion, as a member on that task force, I'm very impressed at how open of a blank card we've all been given to really come up with ideas to try to improve administration of justice and availability of our courts to the people of Iowa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any questions on this side? Mr. Brody?
Yes, one quick comment. I think by Thursday morning, we'd appreciate if you would come back with Jack Jackson and help us. But you are a speaker.
I should have brought him now. He could have been sitting here on my knee.
Thursday morning would have been,
All right.
would be appropriate, I think. You mentioned in here that you're a speaker on legal issues.
Yes.
How do you take a very technical issue of the law or whatever the topic you're speaking upon, and make it understandable for laypersons to be able to grasp and understand why certain things are the way they are within the legal system?
You know, of course, most of my speaking has been to other attorneys, but even then, with the complex issues, trying to get it simplified to a point that in a lecture context, the important messages can be passed, can be very difficult. The first thing you have to do is almost go down the rabbit hole, so to speak. You have to dig into the issue obsessively to the point that you understand it and then don't understand it and then think you understand it and then realize that you don't understand it and then eventually do understand it. And once you've gotten to that point, I think it becomes possible to see the broader brushstrokes and to be able to sort of pull the nuggets, pull the little bits of information out of it. That was my experience when I first started speaking about ERISA and Medicare and Medicaid type issues. But I read so many cases, I was going cross-eyed. But eventually I started to see some patterns and some understanding. And then at that point, I think one has the ability then to contribute and to help the body of law move forward.
I think Mr. Cook has a short question.
I do. Actually, I have two, but one's only a serious question. This is the serious question. You've asked us to judge who you are outside the law. And I see in your materials you're president of a skydiving club. What does that tell us about you? And here's the less serious question. If you were to get this job, how would you deal with the confusion of you'd be referred to as justice lawyer?
All right. Well, I'm not sure if either of those were actually serious, but I'll try to address them. Yes, I try not to draw too much attention to my participation in the sport of skydiving, because I think some would think that might be might reflect on my sanity or qualifications. But I assure you that I conduct it very safely and am sane. I've had some say it proves that I'm qualified for the Supreme Court, and some say that it proves that I'm disqualified. No, my participation in that club goes back to my college days. That's just the sport that I picked up. And certainly if I were to become a justice on the court, I would have to withdraw from serving any kind of capacity on that organization. As far as the justice lawyer goes, I don't know. I think it has sort of a nice ring to it.
Mr. Lawyer, we really appreciate you coming here and talking to us today, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.